Jake Matthews thought he'd finally found peace. After years serving in the Army Rangers, he was ready for a quieter life in a small American suburb, where he could focus on raising his 10-year-old daughter, Lila. She had survived a terrible car crash a year earlier, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. She now used a wheelchair and relied on a custom-built ramp to enter their cozy single-story home on Sycamore Drive. Jake wasn't looking for trouble. All he wanted was to help Lila heal, grow, and experience a little joy again. But trouble had a way of finding him. From the first week they moved in, the HOA president, Karen Whitlock, made her presence known. She was tall, sharp-featured, and walked around like she owned the neighborhood. Her blonde bob never moved out of place, and neither did her overly bright lipstick. She dropped off her first warning letter just hours after Jake finished building Lila's ramp, unapproved architectural modification. It read. Jake tossed it in the trash. He didn't need a stranger telling him how to care for his daughter. But Karen wasn't the type to be ignored. The next day, she was standing outside his driveway in her signature sunglasses. Arms crossed, she called the ramp an eyesore. Jake calmly told her the Ada disagreed. She scoffed, turned on her heel, and muttered something about standards slipping. That should have been the end of it. Jake hoped she'd move on. But instead, things escalated. Complaints started flooding in. Trash bins left out too long. Grass growing half an inch above regulation. Anonymous letters about Lila's medical van being parked in front. It was clear Karen had nothing better to do than harass them. Jake documented it all but refused to lose his temper. Then came the day Lila disappeared. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. Jake had gone inside to grab her favorite blanket while Lila played with her toy drone near the curb. When he returned just 2 minutes later, her wheelchair was lying on its side near the storm drain. Her drone was spinning in the street. Blades cracked. And Lila was gone. At first, Jake thought she had crawled off somewhere as a joke. But deep down, a pit of dread opened in his chest. He called her name. Nothing. He searched every inch of the street. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished. Then he heard a faint sound. A weak, terrified voice. "Daddy, help." Jake's head snapped toward the storm drain. He dropped to his knees, peering through the rusted grate. And there she was trapped, curled up in the dark, clutching her arms tightly around her chest. The metal bars had been sealed with a thick bike chain. Jake's hands went to work without thinking. He yanked the grate, but it held tight. He ran to his truck and came back with bolt cutters. In one strong motion, he snapped the chain. Lila was sobbing, trembling as he pulled her out. Her pants were soaked. Her hands were scraped from trying to crawl away inside the wet tunnel. Between sobs, she whispered, "She pushed me, the lady with sunglasses. She laughed and said you'd learn." Jake stood frozen, not because he was afraid, but because he had just realized something important. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was war. He carried Lila inside and called Officer Lena Cruz, a longtime friend from his service days who now worked local law enforcement. She promised to file a report and come by immediately. Jake knew the system would take time, but Karen had made one fatal mistake. She messed with a soldier's daughter, and Jake Matthews wasn't the kind of man to let something like this go. As he tucked Lila in bed that night, he opened a locked drawer in his study. Inside were the pieces of a life he had buried: blueprints, encrypted phones, and one battered tactical field journal with a phrase etched into the leather: outthink, outmaneuver, overwhelm. Because when the law fails, some men take matters into their own hands. Stay with this story because what Jake does next will make Karen wish she'd never heard the word HOA. The flashing red and blue lights lit up Sycamore Drive like a crime scene from a movie. Neighbors peeked out through their blinds, some curious, some pretending not to see. Officer Lena Cruz stepped out of her cruiser and headed straight for Jake, who stood outside his house with Lila wrapped in a thick blanket, still shaking. Lena had known Jake for years since before the war, back when he was a fiery teenager playing linebacker for the high school football team. She'd watched him go off to war and come back changed, quieter, more calculating. If Jake said someone hurt his daughter, Lena didn't need a lie detector. She knelt beside Lila. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what happened?" Lila's voice was barely audible. The mean lady from the yellow house. She told me my ramp made the street look dirty. Then she rolled my chair and said I needed to learn to stay hidden. Jake's fists clenched at his sides. He kept his tone steady, but his eyes burned with the intensity of a man teetering on the edge. Lena stood. "We'll open an investigation, but we need evidence, Jake." He nodded. Of course they did. The problem with HOA Karen was that she was smart in the worst way, manipulative, careful, always hiding behind policy and bureaucracy. Jake knew how she operated. She'd never leave fingerprints. But she had underestimated something critical: Jake's background. He wasn't just a soldier. He was trained in reconnaissance, urban infiltration, and tactical intelligence. And Karen had just declared war on the wrong man. While Lena called in a welfare officer to take Lila's statement, Jake slipped away briefly, walking 2 doors down to the home of his elderly neighbor, Mr. Greenwald. The man was a retired mailman, partially deaf, and rarely spoke more than a grunt. But he saw everything from that rocking chair of his. Greenwald answered the door and blinked at Jake. "Did you see anything strange about 30 minutes ago?" Jake asked. Greenwald stared for a long second, then nodded. "She was out there. Tall one. Big sunglasses. She bent over the girl's chair. Thought it was odd. Did you see her push her?" He hesitated again, then muttered, "She did something. I thought maybe she was helping the child. Then I saw her walking off real fast, holding something shiny. Wasn't right." Jake nodded. That was enough. It wouldn't hold up in court yet, but it confirmed what he already knew. By the time he returned home, Lena had taken a full report and had already spoken to Karen. She denied everything, Lena said. Arms folded. Said Lila must have rolled herself in by accident. Claimed her security footage was deleted accidentally this morning. Of course it was. Jake muttered. Lena glanced at him, lowering her voice. "I know this is messed up, but legally, we're limited without hard proof. No direct witnesses, no usable footage. And that chain could have been placed by anyone." Jake gave a dry laugh. "She'll be careful now. She's spooked." "That worries me," Lena said. "If she's bold enough to do something like this and still lie to my face, what's she going to do next?" Jake didn't answer. He was already thinking 5 moves ahead. That night, while Lila slept peacefully for the first time in days, Jake went into his garage. It looked like any suburban workspace, tools hanging on the walls, shelves of paint and lawn gear. But behind the tall metal cabinet, he slid open a hidden panel. Inside was a military-grade drone with night vision capabilities. He hadn't used it in years, but like everything else he kept, it was in pristine condition. He charged it, sensed the feed to his old laptop, and launched it silently into the night air. The drone hovered 30 feet above Karen's house. Her windows glowed with warm light. From above, she looked like any normal neighbor, sipping wine on her back porch in a designer robe. But Jake wasn't fooled. He watched as she paced on a phone call, then opened her side gate and wheeled a small garbage bin into her backyard. She bent down and began pulling something metallic out of it, what looked like a damaged child's wheelchair component. He snapped photos, video, logged timestamps. She was getting rid of the evidence. Jake smiled grimly. Let her keep thinking she was winning. The storm hadn't ended when Lila was found. It had just begun. And in the shadows of suburbia, where HOA politics usually meant landscaping complaints and trash can citations, something far more dangerous was rising. A father's resolve, a warrior's instinct, and a payback plan already in motion. The next morning, Jake stepped out onto his porch with a mug of black coffee and calm fire in his eyes. Across the street, Karen Whitlock was already pruning her perfectly trimmed rose bushes like nothing had happened. Not a care in the world. No remorse. No hint of shame. Her robe was spotless. Her lipstick was bright. Her smile tight and smug. Jake didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just watched. Later that afternoon, Officer Lena Cruz returned with news, though none of it was surprising. She's lawyered up already, Lena said, sliding into one of Jake's patio chairs. Said she's being harassed, claimed you're the one intimidating her. Jake didn't blink. Of course she did. Lena sighed. She's using the HOA's legal budget to defend herself. She said everything was a misunderstanding, that Lila probably fell on her own, and that you're exploiting your daughter's condition for attention. Jake's jaw twitched, but his voice remained even. She said that on record. Lena nodded. Sure did. She also said she wants to file a restraining order. Jake raised an eyebrow. Against me? Yeah. You? The father of the child she locked in a drain. Jake stood slowly, walked to his porch rail, and stared down the quiet cul-de-sac. It looked peaceful. Trees rustling, sprinklers going off, dogs barking in the distance. But he knew better. He had lived in foreign villages where smiling faces masked darker truths. Places where quiet didn't mean safe. Karen wasn't just evil, she was strategic. She was covering her tracks, poisoning public opinion, rewriting the story before anyone else could speak. Jake wasn't going to let her win. He spent the rest of the afternoon documenting every interaction he had with her from the past 3 weeks. Every complaint, every fine, every HOA email demanding he move his daughter's medical van. He pulled up copies of his home's security footage, including the time-stamped clip showing Karen lingering around Lila's chair the day before the dorm drain incident. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough to raise questions. Enough to cast doubt on her misunderstanding defense. Then he made a decision, one he'd been avoiding. He pulled a dusty plastic bin from the back of his attic labeled Crow. Inside were the remains of a field operation kit from his final deployment. An encrypted burner phone, infrared trail cams, wireless microphones, and a lightweight tactical vest designed for urban stealth. Karen had decided to turn this into a battle of narratives. Jake was about to turn it into an operation. That evening, he took a walk around the neighborhood just before sunset. He greeted familiar faces, nodded politely. He wasn't just being friendly. He was observing. 3 houses had new surveillance signs. 2 more had fresh yard signs for Karen's whole re-election campaign. Karen wasn't retreating. She was fortifying. But she didn't see Mr. Greenwald watching her from behind his curtain. She didn't notice the drone quietly gliding above the rooftops. And she definitely didn't notice the small motion-triggered mic Jake hid inside the community bulletin board next to the clubhouse entrance. Because while Karen played public relations games, Jake played chess. The next day, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting to address safety concerns regarding disruptive residents. Flyers were stapled to every mailbox by dawn. It was clear who the target was. Jake attended without saying a word. The meeting was held at the community center, and Karen stood at the front like she was delivering a TED Talk. She painted a picture of a dangerous man, angry, aggressive, paranoid. She described an environment of fear and manipulation. And the worst part, some people nodded along. A few even clapped. Jake watched. He didn't react, but he noticed everything. The way Karen controlled the room, the subtle threats she made, the smirk when someone asked if that girl's father would be punished. But Karen made one mistake that night. After the meeting ended, she pulled aside one of the junior board members and whispered something cruel. She should have been kept in that drain. Maybe then he'd move out. Jake's mic caught every word. As the crowd left, Jake walked home quietly. The neighborhood believed her for now, but things were about to change. Because now Jake had her voice on tape. And with that, the storm started to shift direction. At exactly 2:17 a.m., Jake Matthews stepped out into his backyard under a moonless sky. The street was silent, but his senses were sharp. Old instincts, long buried under years of trying to live a normal life, had clawed their way back to the surface. The quiet hum of his drone above confirmed what he already knew. Karen's lights were off. Her house was dark, and her cameras were still jammed by a frequency blocker hidden in Jake's garage wall. He had 7 hours to prepare. Jake wasn't just planning revenge, he was building a network. A trap designed not to punish Karen physically, but to destroy the foundation she stood on. Reputation, control, fear. Those were her weapons. So Jake would take them from her. By sunrise, Jake had mapped out every movement Karen made in a typical day: her coffee run, her afternoon HOA patrols, her secret meeting every Thursday with a shady contractor named Alonzo, whose trucks always parked a few streets down without HOA permits. Jake pulled favors from old army buddies who owed him more than one life. One of them, a cybersecurity analyst in Virginia, hacked into the HOA's cloud storage system. What they found wasn't just ugly, it was explosive. Buried among HOA reports were dozens of flagged violations issued to non-white, disabled, and veteran homeowners, all of whom had either moved away or been pressured into silence. Karen had even funneled neighborhood improvement funds into a side business run by her cousin. Jake printed everything. He made copies, labeled them neatly, then locked them in a waterproof case and slid it beneath the false bottom of Lila's toy chest, just in case things went sideways. Then came the community ops. Jake began planting questions. He casually mentioned to a few neighbors how strange it was that Karen's house had been repainted for free by a company under HOA contract. He offered to help one of the dads fix a broken fence, then mentioned that Karen had charged his neighbor $300 for the same issue. Each conversation planted seeds of doubt. It wasn't just about Karen being cruel to Jake and Lila. It was about showing the entire neighborhood that they were all being manipulated. Jake also called in Lena Cruz off the record. He shared the audio clip of Karen's hateful remark from the HOA meeting. She should have been kept in that drain. Lena's jaw clenched when she heard it. This is enough to open a formal case, she said. You sure you want to go public with this? Jake nodded. She's already painted me as a villain. Time to show them the truth. But he wasn't ready to strike just yet. He needed Karen overconfident. So he started laying bait. He parked Lila's van crooked on purpose, left his trash bins out a few hours longer, planted minor infractions around his lawn, painted the mailbox a slightly darker shade of navy. All carefully planned, all completely reversible, and like clockwork, Karen responded. She issued 3 fines in 2 days, all signed personally. She even left a passive-aggressive note about Lila's toys being left near the sidewalk. But Jake wasn't angry. He was thrilled. Because now, every move she made was being recorded via trail cam, drone footage, audio bugs, and Lena's newly Approved body cam visits. Then came the real test. Jake staged a community complaint under a fake name. He accused Karen of violating ADA guidelines for her past actions against Lila. He filed the complaint through the state's online disability protection site. Anonymous. Traceable only through a legal warrant. He waited. For days later, a letter arrived at Karen's door. A formal state investigation had begun. Karen's precious control over the HOA budget and rule enforcement was now under external scrutiny. Jake watched from his porch as she opened the envelope, read the header, and froze. Her lips twitched. Her jaw clenched. She didn't know who sent it, and that was exactly how Jake wanted it. But the mission wasn't complete yet. It wasn't enough to expose her. He wanted every neighbor who blindly supported her to see who she really was with their own eyes. And that meant the final piece of the plan had to fall into place. Karen needed to make one more mistake. Just one. And Jake was about to help her make it. Karen Whitlock was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. The morning after receiving the state's investigation letter, she exploded. She stormed out of her house at 7 a.m., still in a silk robe and slippers, screaming into her phone loud enough for the entire block to hear. Her dog barked furiously in the background while she rattled off legal jargon. She clearly didn't understand. Jake stood calmly on his porch, sipping coffee, pretending to scroll through his phone. She pointed at him from across the street. He did this? It's him. That ungrateful vet. Jake said nothing. He didn't need to. 2 hours later, the HOA's legal office emailed Jake a formal cease and desist letter, accusing him of harassment, trespassing, and cyber intrusion. They gave him 72 hours to remove his wheelchair ramp or face daily fines. The letter was signed not just by Karen, but by the remaining 2 board members, both of whom were known allies of hers. Jake printed the letter and placed it carefully on his workbench, right next to the original HOA handbook, the Fair Housing Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. By noon, he had his response drafted, with legal input from an old Army buddy turned VA housing attorney. Jake filed a 32-page complaint directly with the state's Department of Fair Housing. He included timestamps, video stills, drone clips, whole emails, and the damning audio of Karen joking about leaving Lila in the storm drain. Lena Cruz also submitted her official police report, now upgraded to include obstruction and child endangerment. Since Karen's statements conflicted with evidence they were now compiling. But Jake wasn't done. That night, while Karen slept behind her locked doors, Jake's drone flew silently over Sycamore Drive. It followed one of her contractor contacts, Alonzo, the guy who always parked 2 blocks over in an unmarked white van. Jake watched as Alonzo dumped construction waste onto a vacant lot at the edge of the neighborhood. The next morning, HOA notices were delivered to the 3 homes closest to that lot, falsely accusing them of illegal dumping and threatening fines. Jake now had everything he needed. The next evening, Jake assembled anonymous envelopes and delivered them house to house, more than 40 in all. Inside each packet was a printed report titled, "The Truth About Your HOA President." The first page showed a full-color screenshot of Karen's HOA emails bullying, targeting families, and funneling funds into her cousin's cleaning company. The second page detailed her discriminatory violation history. The third page had the audio transcript of her storm drain remark. And the fourth, a QR code linking to a secure, private video site where every neighbor could watch drone footage of Karen meeting with Alonzo, dumping evidence, and weaponizing HOA policy for personal grudges. Within 24 hours, the neighborhood exploded. Jake didn't even have to say a word. Phone calls buzzed across Sycamore Drive. Group chats lit up. Screenshots were passed around like wildfire. People who had never spoken to Jake were now stopping by his porch, shaking his hand, apologizing for ever doubting him. At the next HOA meeting, Karen showed up with full makeup, a blazer, and a speech prepared. But she was met with silence, cold stares, and one of the board members, the same one who'd signed that cease and desist, stood up and read Jake's packet aloud. Karen denied everything, of course. Said it was all fabricated. Said Jake was manipulating footage. Claimed the voice in the audio wasn't hers. Then someone asked about the construction waste and why her cousin's cleaning company had been paid 5 times the going rate for basic services. She couldn't answer. Jake never even entered the room. He stayed on his porch, listening to the live feed through a hidden mic placed days earlier in the HOA lectern. He didn't need to be there. The truth was doing the work for him now. But Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. She made one final move. That night, around 3 a.m., someone tried to break into Jake's shed. The lock was cut, the door slightly ajar. Unfortunately for the intruder, Jake had rigged the area with a homemade sprinkler trap laced with concentrated skunk scent and activated by a basic tripwire. The following morning, Karen's car was found, abandoned to blocks over, reeking so badly it had to be towed. And her front lawn, splattered with dye from the activated sprinkler, forming one simple word in red: guilty. Jake didn't laugh. He simply checked the footage, archived it, and sent a single copy to Lila Cruz. The game was almost over. But the final move would be the most devastating yet. By sunrise, the red guilty stain on Karen's front lawn had gone viral. Someone Jake didn't know who and didn't care had taken a picture and posted it to the neighborhood's private Facebook group. Within hours, it had been reposted to Reddit's HOA Nightmares thread. Then a local news outlet picked it up with the headline, HOA president accused of trapping disabled child in storm drain. Karen tried to issue a statement denying the allegations. She claimed she'd been framed, slandered by a troubled veteran with a vendetta. But it was too late. The neighborhood didn't believe her anymore, and neither did the state. Jake watched the storm unfold from his porch, sipping coffee as reporters rolled onto a Sycamore Drive like ants on sugar. Vans parked along the street. Cameras pointed at Karen's front door. Microphones shoved in her face every time she stepped outside. But what no one expected, what even Jake hadn't fully predicted, was how fast the HOA began to collapse. The board held an emergency meeting 3 days later. For the first time in HOA history, it was open to the public and packed to the walls. Neighbors who'd never attended a single meeting now shouted from the back row. People demanded answers. Why were funds missing? Why were veteran homeowners being pushed out? Why was a disabled child treated like a nuisance instead of a neighbor? Karen stood at the front, flanked by the 2 remaining board members, but her face looked different now. The smugness was gone. Her lips were tight, eyes scanning the room for support and finding none. Then Mr. Greenwald spoke. The same quiet old man, who never left his porch, who most assumed didn't care about anything beyond his mail, rose from the back of the room and told everyone exactly what he saw. I saw her roll that girl's chair. I saw her walk off smiling. That ain't neighborly. That ain't decent. That's evil. Karen tried to shut him down, called him senile, but the crowd didn't buy it. Another neighbor stood, then another. One by one, they shared stories of Karen's rain-selective fines, threats, backdoor deals with her cousins, shady company. Even those who once supported her now turned cold. When the floor opened for a vote of no confidence, every hand went up. Every single one. Karen was removed as president on the spot. Her board allies resigned without argument. The HOA announced it would be entering a complete audit and restructuring phase starting immediately. But the worst blow came not from the HOA, but from the state itself. 2 days after the public meeting, Karen was formally served with a civil suit filed under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. It listed multiple violations: discrimination, harassment, and child endangerment. The footage Jake had collected, the audio recordings, the emails, the drone clips had all been submitted through Lila Cruz's department and now formed the backbone of a multi-agency investigation. Karen tried to hide. She hired a new lawyer. She changed her number. But the damage was done. Her name was smeared across every local news site. Parents in the school district signed a petition demanding she be banned from all PTA events. Her cousin's cleaning company was blacklisted. Her front door was egged twice. And Jake, he never once raised his voice, never once lost control. He simply moved Lila's ramp to the front of the house, where everyone could see it, added solar lights to make it shine at night, painted the railings with bright colors, and mounted a new sign beside the door that read, "Access is freedom." Lila beamed every time she rolled down it. Still, Jake knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because just when things seemed to settle, a letter arrived addressed to him with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no signature. Just a short message in elegant handwriting. "You think this is over? Wait until you see who Karen was working for." Jake folded the paper slowly. He thought he was dealing with one woman on a power trip. But this was bigger. Jake Matthews stared at the anonymous letter for a long time. The handwriting was clean, purposeful, expensive. There was no return address, no watermark, no smudges. Whoever sent it had gone through great lengths to hide their identity. And that last line echoed in Jake's mind like a war drum. Wait until you see who Karen was working for. He'd thought it was just one narcissistic HOA president with too much time on her hands. But if Karen was part of something bigger, something organized, then this wasn't just personal. It was tactical. Jake activated his drone again that night, flying a tighter grid, circling the outer homes of Sycamore Drive. He wasn't looking for Karen anymore. He was watching for movement that didn't belong: marked vans, late-night foot traffic, or any suspicious activity that might suggest surveillance. By 2 a.m., he had something. A black SUV with tinted windows had parked just outside the neighborhood. Engine off, lights down. It sat there for 23 minutes before silently pulling away. Jake noted the plates. He traced the number back through a contact in DMV enforcement. It came back registered to a private development firm in downtown Charleston, Waverly Properties. Jake didn't recognize the name, but Lila Cruz did. They've been trying to acquire properties in neighborhoods around the city for over a year, she said, flipping through her notes the next morning. They buy up homes in HOA-run communities and flip them into mini luxury developments. Quiet, legal, but dirty underneath. And Karen, Jake asked, she was working for them. That's how she got the funds for those fake HOA improvements. They pay certain board members to harass owners into selling. Jake nodded slowly. It made sense now. Karen wasn't just mean, she was executing a strategy. Target vulnerable homeowners, hit them with bogus violations, then drive them out until they were desperate enough to sell below market value. They tried to do it to me, Jake muttered. Only problem was, I didn't scare. Lila smirked. They're about to learn you don't bend either. Jake got to work. He compiled a full report with every detail about Waverly Properties, who they'd paid off, what neighborhoods they'd targeted, the LLCs they used to cover their tracks. Lila helped him file a formal complaint with the state Attorney General. At the same time, Jake put together a package for a local investigative reporter who specialized in real estate corruption. And then he set the final trap. He scheduled a fake home showing at his own property posed as if he were considering selling. He listed it discreetly, then had a friend pose as a real estate agent. As expected, someone from Waverly reached out within 48 hours. The man who showed up for the tour wore a sharp suit and a fake smile. Jake recognized him instantly from the Waverly team bios. Chandler Rhodes, acquisitions manager. The man who usually handled buyouts after board members paved the way. Jake let him into the house, let him see the living room, the backyard, the freshly rebuilt wheelchair ramp. Chandler said all the right things. Polite, complimentary. "We just want to help restore value to this beautiful street," he said, "and we're prepared to make a generous cash offer." Jake waited until Chandler stepped into the garage. Then he shut the door and hit record. He asked one question. "How long were you paying Karen?" Chandler blinked. "Excuse me." Jake leaned in. "How long were you paying her to push me out?" Chandler's smile faltered. "I think this conversation is over." "No," Jake said. "I think it just started." Chandler reached for the door, but it was locked. Not permanently, just long enough for Jake to calmly finish recording his statement. Chandler eventually gave in, muttered something about untraceable payments, and said Karen wasn't supposed to go that far. Jake got it all on tape. 2 hours later, he uploaded the footage and sent copies to the local news, Lina Cruz, and every single homeowner on Sycamore Drive. By that evening, Waverly Properties had a PR disaster on their hands. Karen's name was now tied to a citywide gentrification scandal. Chandler Rhodes was suspended. Real estate forums lit up. Lawsuits started stacking. And for the first time in weeks, Jake saw Lila laugh again. She rolled down her ramp under a rainbow of solar lights, squealing with joy as she raced her toy drone. Neighbors came out to wave. Some even brought cookies. The energy on the block had shifted. It wasn't fear anymore. It was freedom. But Jake knew something most people didn't. When one snake gets its head cut off, the others start slithering. And, sure enough, 1 week later, a government SUV pulled into his driveway. A man stepped out in a clean suit with a state badge. "Mr. Matthews," he said calmly, "the governor's office is aware of what you did here, and they'd like to talk." Jake Matthews never imagined he'd see a government vehicle in his driveway again, not after retiring from combat service and moving to a quiet neighborhood in search of peace. Yet here it was, a silver SUV with tinted windows and official plates. Standing beside it was a man in a suit with sharp eyes and a polished badge. "Mr. Matthews," the agent said as he extended his hand. "Name's Howard Lantham. Governor's Office of Residential Integrity." Jake shook his hand cautiously. "What can I do for you?" Lantham didn't smile. "We've been following your situation. What happened with your HOA president and your daughter?" It sparked something much bigger. Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're saying this wasn't just about Karen?" Lantham glanced around, then leaned in. "Let's just say Sycamore Drive was the tip of the iceberg. We've had complaints piling up across the state, people being forced out of their homes. Strategic fines, falsified complaints. The evidence you gathered exposed a coordinated buyout ring that's now under federal investigation." Jake stepped back slightly. "You're telling me this goes national?" "Already is," Lantham said. "And here's the kicker, your documentation, it connected the dots in a way we couldn't. You did in 3 weeks what our office couldn't do in 3 years. Frankly, we want you on our side." Jake crossed his arms. "You offering me a job?" Lantham nodded. "Consultancy role. Flexible, remote. Veterans preference. We want your help rooting out corrupt HOA letters across the state, and if this goes federal, across the country." Jake took a long breath, staring at the yard where Lila was happily playing. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt like a place worth protecting. "I'll think about it," he said. But even before the SUV pulled away, Jake already knew his answer. Within the week, the story broke statewide. Veteran exposes corrupt HOA real estate scheme. Sparks criminal probe and reform bills. Jake became a local hero overnight. Interview requests came in droves, but he declined everyone. He didn't want fame. He wanted change. More importantly, he wanted peace for Lila, who now spent her afternoons laughing with neighbors' kids, her days no longer haunted by fear or exclusion. Karen Whitlock, meanwhile, was charged with multiple counts of civil misconduct, harassment, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. Her cousin's company went under. Waverly Properties withdrew from every neighborhood where it held active contracts, and its executives were now under criminal review. But the real shock came when Jake attended the first city council hearing about HOA reform. One of the speakers was a man in his early 50s, balding, glasses, slick presentation. He wore a pin on his blazer with Waverly's former logo. He stood and calmly admitted, on record, that dozens of HOA boards had been infiltrated by private development firms looking to flip neighborhoods on the cheap. And this, he said, was always part of the plan. Jake sat quietly in the back row. He didn't need to speak. The system was finally listening. 3 months later, Jake received a large manila envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a notarized deed and a hand-signed letter. The deed transferred full ownership of the community's Central Park, the same park where Karen once tried to ban wheelchair access, to a newly formed nonprofit, Lila's Way. The nonprofit's charter maintains safe, accessible public spaces for all families, regardless of physical ability or HOA politics. At the bottom of the letter was one final message. "The war you started may have saved thousands of families. She caged your daughter. You freed a community." Jake folded the letter and looked across the street, where construction had already begun on new ramps, wider sidewalks, and inclusive playground equipment. And there in the center of it all, wearing her pink helmet and a smile big enough to crack the sky, was Lila, racing her wheelchair faster than the wind, laughing with pure, unstoppable joy. In a place once ruled by rules and power plays, something else now reigned. Accountability. Justice. And above all, freedom. Jake had come to Sycamore Drive looking for peace. What he found was purpose. And thanks to him, no child would ever be caged again, not by steel bars, not by fear, and not by the tyranny of a neighborhood dictator. So if you're still watching this story, ask yourself, what would you do if someone hurt your child? Would you wait? Would you fold? Or would you do what Jake Matthews did and bring the tactical payback? End.